Hi, I'm Carrie, and I'm 15 years old. Recently, my date ended up like a nightmare. I could have easily died several times. Once I was invited to my classmate's birthday party, and there was this guy, Joey, there, who was a little bit older than I was and who I really liked a lot. At some point, everybody began to play Spin the Bottle, and when my turn came, it pointed at Joey. So we kissed, and then we did it again after the game. Well, Joey was a professional swimmer, and he was fond of everything connected with water. While for me, the water was terrifying, like a phobia or something. But I was afraid to admit that because I thought he'd think that I was lame and so on. So when he invited to take me on a boat ride on the lake, I decided to work up the nerve if I really wanted us to be together. Well, the place itself, the lake surrounded by the forest was amazingly beautiful. But just as soon as we got closer to the boat, I felt my knees start to shake, even though we were still on the shore. And then as Joey was rowing, he just kept devotedly telling me something about the scene and admiring the nature all around. And I was really trying to hide my shaking hands between my knees. At some point, I decided that it'd be better not to look around and try to forget that I was in the middle of a deep lake. So I just stared at Joey. Apparently, he took that as a call for action, put the paddles down, and leaned forward to kiss me. Of course, from his movement, our boat swayed, probably very slightly, but to me, it was enough to make me freak out. I panicked. I started to yell at Joey to make him stop doing whatever he was doing. I don't know why, but I tried to stand up, and then he tried to hug me or something to calm me down, but it only made things worse. I screamed and pushed him away so hard that he fell overboard while I fell down on the bottom of the boat. I got so frightened that I couldn't say a word and just kept trying to choke back tears. Joey tried to get into the boat again, but it banked and I thought it might flip over. So I started beating his arms to make him let go. He looked at me like I was insane or something. It was obvious that he not only couldn't understand what was happening, but also that he was really angry at me. And then he cursed at me and swam to the shore. He left me there alone. I knew I should have told him something, but I couldn't. My fear seemed to have deprived me of any ability to talk or to move. There I was, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by water and scared to death. Either the undercurrent turned out to be too fast or Joey was a really fast swimmer, but very soon he completely disappeared from my sight. My panic was growing stronger with every second. I sat down at the bottom of the boat with my arms around my knees, trying to just calm myself down. I groped for a phone in the back pocket of my jeans. I wanted to just call my parents, but my fingers were not responding very well, and my hands were wet from sweat. And then suddenly, my phone wriggled out of my grip. Of course, it fell into the water immediately. In that moment, I felt like my heart stopped beating. I desperately looked around, trying to figure out something else I could do to save myself. My eyes fell on the oars. I swallowed nervously and reached out to them, although I had no idea how exactly I needed to row. After a few unsuccessful attempts, I lost one of them. I felt like I was losing myself once again. I laughed nervously. It seemed that there was nothing that could make my situation any worse. I carefully lied down on the bottom of the boat and did everything in my power not to think about the water around me. I closed my eyes for a second and tried to take a deep breath. And apparently, after everything that happened, I simply passed out. I don't know exactly how much time had passed, but when I opened my eyes, it was already getting dark. I didn't want to believe that this wasn't just a bad dream and that everything was happening for real. While I was asleep, my boat must have been carried to another shore because now I could distinctly see something like an abandoned old lake house or maybe a hut somewhere behind the trees. Suddenly, I noticed a figure of a man beside that hut. I began to wave my hands and call for help. For a second, this man's figure froze, and then he rushed to his own boat, which meant that I was finally going to be rescued. Oh, God, I've never felt such relief before. My savior turned out to be a middle-aged man named Tom. His hands were covered with tattoos, and he smelled really bad of sweat, alcohol, and cigarettes, and looked gloomy. But at that moment, I didn't care. When we finally got to the shore, I got out of the boat. I couldn't even stand on my own feet. Tom grabbed me by my arms and led me to his hut. I needed a cell phone to call my parents, but Tom said that he didn't have one. I was about to cry because I wanted to go home to my mom and dad. I asked Tom to drive me home, but he explained that his eyesight was really bad in the darkness. So I had to wait until morning and stay with him in his hut. I wasn't sure about how safe it would be for me, but at the same time, I didn't really have much of a choice. My whole body was shaking from the experience that I had just had, and Tom handed me a glass of something strong and insisted that I drink it. Otherwise, I might get sick. I took a sip, and my mouth and lips started to burn, and the taste of that drink was awful. Ugh. But a few minutes later, I felt that my shaking had stopped, and I didn't feel cold anymore. I wasn't sure how to behave, and it seemed to me that Tom wasn't really a talkative person, so everything was awkward. Besides, he kept staring at me, and his look made me feel uncomfortable, as if I were like naked or something. I started to walk around the dwelling, pretending like I was interested in every little thing there. To be honest, the place looked like some kind of a bunker. Then Tom said that I needed to rest, and there was only one couch to sleep on, and he gave it to me while he was going to sleep in the armchair next to it. But just as soon as I laid down on that couch, Tom went up to the door and closed and locked it. That same second, I felt horrified. To be honest, I didn't know what was better, to be in that boat or here with a total stranger. I was exhausted and I closed my eyes, but every inch of my body felt that Tom was looking at me. A chill ran down my back, and I wrapped myself in the blanket even tighter. Soon I woke up from this strange blabbering sound. It was really dark around, but through the window, I saw a low light of a cell phone. That was impossible. Tom told me that he didn't have one, and now I saw him talking to somebody outside the hut. I had no more doubts. I left. Despite the fact that he had saved me from that lake, it was dangerous for me to stay with him any longer. Thoughts began to flash through my mind at the speed of light. I knew that if I wanted to escape the house, I needed to move fast before he came back and locked the door again. I jumped into my sneakers without tying my shoelaces and snuck out the door. There were only two ways to get out of that place. Back in the water, no thank you, or through the night forest. Suddenly, my eyes fell on his truck. I crept over to it, as silent as I could, and looked inside. Luckily, the key was in the ignition. I hadn't got my driver's license yet, but I knew how to drive, in theory. So I thought that this was my only chance to escape. But as my bad fate would have it, the car engine didn't want to start. I saw Tom, heard the noise, and rushed over to me really fast. I was desperate. I left the car and ran deep into the forest. But my untied shoelaces clung to the roots of the trees, and I fell face down. I heard Tom's approaching footsteps and closed my eyes in fear. Suddenly, headlights lit me up. I turned my head and saw a car and a bunch of people leaving it. And I heard a lot of familiar voices. And then my mom and dad started to hug me and kiss me. From the relief that I felt, I cried really hard. It turned out that when I didn't come home that evening, my parents went to Joey's house to find out what was going on. He told them everything, and everyone was really worried. All together, they went to search for me, and luckily, they eventually found me. I looked at Joey, and he rushed to me and begged me to forgive him. At that moment, I was so happy that everything was finally over that I couldn't help but hug him too. My dad wanted to thank Tom for dragging me from the lake and went toward the hut, but he couldn't find him anywhere. It was really strange. We decided to go home because everybody had experienced more than enough worry for that day. After that, Joey and I started dating. He really loves me, and I think he's still very sorry for what happened that day, especially after I told him about everything in detail. Although my dad seems to have not forgiven him yet, because whenever Joey comes to take me to the movies, for example, my dad just makes us send him our geolocation every half hour. But what still bothers me is that when the next day after my rescue, my dad and I returned to that hut to try to find Tom and thank him, he had completely vanished into thin air. Actually, there were no traces that he had even been there at all. And the hut itself now looked as if no one had lived there for many years.